She was sent away, now everyone wants to join her. When the world fractured, the ruined islands were the end of everything. Jagged rocks jutting from gray water, half-drowned ruins, and the bones of forgotten ships. No one wanted to be sent there. Exile meant oblivion. But Mira Solis didn't beg for mercy as the last boatman dropped her on the shattered dock and left her with only a bag of tools and a few days' food. She stood alone, sea spray in her face, and stared at the desolate cluster of islands stitched together by rusty bridges and floating debris. "This is where I begin again," she whispered, knuckles white on her pack. She made her way to the largest island, what had once been a fishing village, now half swallowed by tide and silence. Every wall was cracked, every roof broken. But in the rubble, Mira found shelter, a boathouse sturdy enough to keep out the wind and rain. That night, listening to waves and gulls, she promised herself, "I will not disappear." Survival was not guaranteed. Mira scavenged for supplies, rope, nets, rusted cans, scraps of plastic, and driftwood. She patched leaks in the boathouse roof with sails torn from ghost ships, boiled seawater in battered pots, and set fish traps along the rocky shallows. Food was always short, and the cold bit through every layer of clothing. But Mira moved with relentless purpose, making plans on the back of old charts with a stub of pencil. She found seeds in the pockets of a dead fisherman's coat. She built planners from broken crates and scattered soil salvaged from abandoned gardens. Days blurred together. Work, hunger, repair, hope. No one came. Until one dawn, a battered rowboat appeared at the edge of the harbor. Inside, a woman and her child, hollow-eyed, desperate, shivering in the morning mist. Mira welcomed them without hesitation, sharing her fish and her fire. Word spread, even to the forgotten corners of the world. A man appeared, dragging a raft stacked with plastic drums. A pair of teenagers swam across the narrow channel, clutching salvaged suitcases. An old woman arrived, humming a song about storms and rebirth. Each newcomer brought something: skills, stories, hope. Mira set ground rules. We share what we find. We repair what's broken. Everyone works. Everyone eats. They cleared rubble and rebuilt shelters from sun-bleached planks. They strung nets between the docks, gathering shellfish and seaweed. In time, a floating garden sprouted on the calmest bay, anchored by barrels and rope, green shoots rising above the endless gray. Nights were spent around a driftwood fire, telling stories to drown out the wind. The ruined islands were still harsh, but now, together, they began to feel like home. The community on the islands grew slowly, each new face a gamble between trust and survival. Mira welcomed every newcomer with open hands and clear eyes. She learned names, listened to stories, and asked what each person could build, fix, or teach. They turned a wrecked fishing trawler into a communal kitchen. A mechanic repaired old solar panels found in a collapsed warehouse, bringing faint light to the darkest huts. Children learned to braid nets and plant sea beans in floating gardens, laughter echoing over the waves. Danger was never far away. Storms battered their fragile shelters, tearing away roofs and washing precious supplies into the sea. Once, a pack of desperate raiders landed, demanding food and fuel. Mira stood firm before her people. We protect each other. We will not bow to fear. The raiders left with nothing but angry shouts, and the community grew stronger for it. Adapting to the islands was a daily lesson in creativity. A nurse taught how to filter water through charcoal and sand, saving countless lives. An artist painted warnings on the rocks, red spirals for sharp currents, blue lines for safe harbors. A group of teens learned to fish with spears, diving among the kelp forests for supper. Every member of the community took a turn on watch, scanning the horizon for new arrivals or threats. At night, they shared stories and skills by the fire. How to patch a boat, how to tell the weather by the wind, how to find edible seaweed among the rocks. The ruins of the islands became a classroom, a laboratory, and, slowly, a sanctuary. Mira walked the docks each night, grateful for the laughter and voices where once there had only been silence. Their floating haven began to draw attention from the mainland. Rumors drifted with the tide, of a place where exiles survived, where the hungry found food and the lost found belonging. More boats arrived, some carrying families, others bandits seeking easy plunder. Mira greeted each group at the water's edge. She was calm, but unyielding. This is not a place for taking, only for building. If you want to stay, you must work alongside us. Some left, disappointed by the lack of easy comfort. Others stayed, drawn to the fragile hope that clung to every plank and garden. One stormy night, as winds battered the boathouse, the entire community gathered to sing songs of the sea, voices rising above the roar, turning fear into unity. For the first time, the islands felt not like exile, but home. With every passing season, the floating haven changed. Tangles of green spread across the docks, cabbages, tomatoes, and sea beans thriving in barrels and crates. Goats and chickens, rescued from a sinking ferry, became part of daily life. Children played among the moored boats, inventing games with shells and driftwood. The community built a floating bridge between the main islands, making travel safer even when the tide rose. They repaired the old lighthouse, lighting it each night with oil salvaged from shipwrecks, a beacon for the lost and a warning to those who would bring harm. Mira started a council so everyone could share in decisions. Arguments flared over food, over newcomers, over the future, but were settled with honesty and sometimes exhausted laughter. What had once been exile was now the only place many could imagine calling home. But hardship was never far behind. A red tide poisoned their waters, killing fish and spoiling the harvest of seaweed. Storms battered the gardens, and fires swept through the oldest huts, leaving families huddled on the docks. Mira called the community together. Her voice, calm but fierce, reminded them, "We are not here because it is easy. We are here because we make it work. Together." They rebuilt what the sea and wind had taken. Neighbors shared what little they had, and skilled hands mended what was broken. The floating gardens grew again, stronger than before. People sang old songs of storms survived and futures reclaimed. Even loss could not break what they had built. News of the island's resilience spread far and wide. Boats now arrived with people bringing not only needs but also gifts, new seeds, fishing tools, stories, and rare medicines. Some arrivals came from distant lands, drawn by tales of hope across ruined coasts. The community welcomed them, learning new skills and sharing their own. Mira saw that her vision had grown beyond her hands, every member teaching, building, and healing. One day, a council of elders suggested connecting more islands with floating walkways, expanding the haven further. Plans were drawn, and soon new bridges linked old ruins with gardens and homes. As dusk fell and the lighthouse beams swept across the waves, Mira stood on the dock, listening to voices and laughter that would not be silenced, not by exile, nor by storm, nor by time. Years passed, and the floating haven became a true city of the sea. The islands were now linked by sturdy walkways, their edges bristling with flowering vines and nets full of mussels. Market days bustled with energy, fish, vegetables, woven goods, and stories exchanged in the open air. Children learned to swim before they could walk. The Council of Elders grew, with new voices from every corner of the archipelago. Old shipwrecks were transformed into homes, schools, and even a floating library where books were traded like treasure. Mira's hair turned silver, but her step was steady. She mentored young leaders, teaching them not only survival, but the values of trust and belonging. Each year, on the anniversary of her exile, the whole community gathered on the main dock to celebrate. Drums, lanterns, laughter. Proof that what had started in loneliness had become a family. Yet challenges still came. A fierce storm struck, tearing away docks and flooding gardens. Some of the oldest boats were lost to the waves, and for days, hunger threatened the fragile peace. Mira did not retreat. She helped organize repairs, comforted the grieving, and encouraged everyone to share what little remained. The council called a meeting. "We must help our neighbors, even if we have little," said Mira. They sent teams to the hardest-hit islands, rebuilt bridges, and shared food and supplies. Word spread. The islands were not just a sanctuary, but a source of hope and aid for others adrift in a broken world. As the last storm clouds lifted, a rainbow arched over the floating gardens, a promise that their haven would endure. With stability came new dreams. Young people dreamed of building a school for navigation and the sea trades. Elders taught ancient crafts and told stories of the world before disaster. Visitors from distant shores brought fresh seeds and rare books. Some stayed and built new homes on the edge of the haven. Others returned to their own lands, sharing what they had learned. Mira grew quieter, but watched with pride as her city flourished. Children planted trees on rafts, singing songs that echoed across the water. On Midsummer's night, lanterns floated between the islands, each light a prayer, a hope, or a thank you. In the gentle glow, Mira realized that exile had become destiny, and her floating haven had become a beacon for all those seeking a place to belong. The floating haven's influence spread across the seas. Delegates from other ruined island chains and coastal settlements arrived by boat, eager to learn how Mira's people had turned disaster into hope. Council meetings grew larger, with translators sharing wisdom in many tongues. Trade blossomed. Seaweed, fish, salt, and handmade crafts were exchanged for pottery, new seeds, and music from distant lands. Children made pen pals across the waves, drawing maps and sending them on the wind. New ideas flourished as well. Engineers designed better rafts and floating windmills. Gardeners experimented with crops that could thrive on brackish water. A group of young builders even began to plan a floating festival. Rafts joined together, lanterns strung overhead, music drifting under the stars. Mira watched, amazed at how far her vision had traveled, ripple by ripple, heart by heart. But change, even joyful, was never easy. Some old-timers feared that too much openness would bring danger back to the islands. Arguments rose at council. Should they keep expanding or protect what they had already built? Mira listened, letting every voice be heard. She reminded them, "When I first arrived, I had nothing. If those before me had closed the door, we would not have survived. We must be wise, but never afraid to welcome those in need." A compromise was struck. Newcomers would be welcomed, but all would learn the rules of community and share in its work. This balance of openness and care became the haven's new strength. The years sped by and Mira's legend grew. On the anniversary of her exile, now celebrated as Founders' Day, hundreds gathered to honor her. The children launched boats made of reeds, each bearing a tiny candle, lights floating between the islands, a glowing necklace in the dusk. Mira, now older and slower, sat surrounded by friends and family, watching the celebration with a quiet, grateful heart. A young girl asked, "Did you ever think it would become this big?" Mira smiled, "I only hope to survive. You are the ones who made it a home." As music and laughter echoed across the water, Mira understood that the islands were no longer a place of exile, but a promise, a living answer to anyone who ever wondered if a single person's courage could change the world. Decades passed. The floating haven was no longer a rumor, but a lighthouse on the sea, seen from far away, studied by dreamers, sung about by children who had never known any other home. Bridges of bamboo and rope now connected not only the original cluster of islands, but dozens more. Floating gardens trailed blossoms and vines out into the waves. Solar lanterns flickered each night along the walkways, marking the paths between old and new. A council of many languages met in a great dome made of driftwood and glass. Elders from across the ocean shared wisdom and news. Engineers worked with artists to design rafts shaped like wings, classrooms that floated, and windmills that sang when the tide shifted. Mira, hair white and hands weathered by salt and sun, spent her days in a small house at the heart of the haven. She taught children how to splice rope, how to fish, and, most importantly, how to listen when someone cried for help. On her 80th birthday, the entire city gathered on the wide deck. Drums, singing, and a feast of fish and wild fruits filled the night. Mira, honored but humble, spoke from her heart. "We built this together, one hand at a time, one tide at a time. If you ever doubt what you can do, look at these islands. Every home a story, every story a light." As the crowd cheered, Mira looked out over the lantern-lit waters and knew her greatest dream had already come true. Mira's final years were peaceful, but never idle. She mentored new leaders, watched as the youngest generation sailed beyond the horizon to map new chains of floating villages, and listened to visitors from ruined cities, offering what wisdom she could. Artists painted her likeness on sails. Her story passed from dock to dock. But Mira always insisted, "This was never my story alone. It belongs to everyone who dared to hope and help." Her legacy was everywhere. In the community gardens, the libraries built on rafts, the festivals where no one danced alone. When storms threatened, Mira was there, leading repairs or comforting the frightened with stories of the early days. When peace returned, she was the first to teach new songs to the children. On the night of her final Founders' Day, Mira spoke to a crowd that spanned the islands and the water between. We survived because we cared for each other. Remember, there is always space for one more. She passed quietly, surrounded by friends, the sound of waves and distant singing filling the air. Mira Solis's name became a legend, not only among her own people, but in distant ports and broken cities where hope still struggled to find a home. The floating haven continued to grow, guided by councils who quoted her words and remembered her calm, patient leadership. Each year on Founders' Day, children built boats of leaves and wax, setting them afloat with messages. We remember, we hope, we welcome. Travelers arrived from the edges of the map, seeking not just safety, but a way to rebuild, together. And so, on a patchwork of ruined islands once meant for exile, a world was born where no one was cast out and everyone could belong. As the sun set and lanterns danced on the sea, Mira's story drifted on the wind. She was sent away. Now everyone wants to join her.